Okay, sounds good. So for the first two speakers here, we've got Matthew and Ken. Congrats to both of you. We're going to pop the topics into the chat. For the recording, I'll also read them out so the audience knows what options y'all had. We've got Matthew on Aff, Ken on Neg. The three options are the gig economy does more harm than good for workers. Nations should prioritize renewable energy over nuclear energy. And the world would be a safer place without national borders. First strike, please.
First strike would be Ken or myself.
I think in this contest, the neg strikes first.
Okay.
So Ken.
I'll strike the gig economy does more harm than good for workers.
And I'll strike the world would be a safer place without national borders.
Copy that. The topic is nations should prioritize renewable energy over nuclear energy. Prep time starts now. One minute used. $15 seconds. Okay. Welcome the affirmative to give a speech not exceeding 2 minutes.
All right, judges, Ken, thank you both very much for being here. It's a great topic that we're jumping into. I'm standing up to affirm that nations should prioritize renewable energy over nuclear energy. And so renewable, we're talking about wind, solar, geothermal, anything that comes from renewable resources. And I've got three main points. First point is long-term. The second point is safety. And the third point is availability. Under point one about long-term, our efficiency has actually gotten much, much higher in the last decade, over 3 times more efficient in the last decade for many of these forms of renewable energy, including solar, wind. And the second subpoint under this is that of investment. Trillions and trillions of dollars of investment has already been made to advance wind, solar, and geothermal energy around the world. Many of this made by governments. So think about this. If we were going to shift back over toward nuclear power, it would be like stopping a puzzle, 5,000 piece puzzle halfway through and saying, well, let's start a new puzzle that's another 5,000 pieces, even if they were equivalent. We already have the training and the technology in place right now, and it's getting more and more efficient year over year. So it is a great long-term play. Point two is safety. There's a lower chance of major disasters with renewable energy, wind, solar, and geothermal versus nuclear. I mean, we all remember the Fukushima power plant disaster in Japan, where they were not even able to get the lights back on due to limitations in their power grid for a long time. 3 Mile Island, another great example. And then my third and final point here is that of availability. Geothermal, wind, and solar are accessible the globe over. Not all these are available in every individual location, but they do have the ability to, anytime the sun's shining, you do have the ability to generate electricity. Anytime the wind is blowing, you do have the ability to generate electricity. Now, what Ken's going to come up here and say is, well, that's not efficient in all places, but you choose the one that works best for you in that location, and all of those are safer than nuclear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ready for the negative.
Awesome. Everyone's ready. I'll begin my time in 3, 2, 1. You ever rely on solar power in a blackout? Yeah, try charging your phone with a cloudy sky and a dream. Let's get into some top case resolution analysis first. Prioritize means putting one over the other in investment, infrastructure, and implementation. So the AF must prove that renewables alone can shoulder the urgent global energy crisis better than nuclear, economically, environmentally, and reliably. I just have to prove that's a bad bet. First, renewables are intermittent. That's my first argument. Solar and wind are weather dependent. They don't produce when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. According to the International Energy Agency, this variability creates serious reliability issues. Nuclear, on the other hand, runs 24/7, rain or shine. When California faced rolling blackouts in 2022, guess what kept the lights on? Diablo Canyon, their last remaining nuclear plant. My second argument is renewables require massive land use and REMs, or rare earth minerals. To match one nuclear plant, you need 300 plus square miles of solar panels, according to the MIT Technology Review in 2024, and wind turbines built with rare metals often mined under horrific labor conditions, especially in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That is not green energy, that is just outsourcing environmental guilt. My third and final argument is going to be nuclear is already the most scalable carbon-free energy source. France gets 70% of its electricity from nuclear energy, and their emissions are among the lowest in the developed world. The US is barely 20% nuclear, and we're struggling to meet climate goals. It is definitely a causality here. So no, we shouldn't prioritize renewables over nuclear. We should absolutely use both. But if we have to pick a backbone for the grid, pick the one that actually works in the dark. That is why the ballot stays negative. Thank you. I'm open for cross whenever you're ready, Matthew.
Please take it away.
Yeah, Ken, great speech. Quick question about your version of resolutional analysis. When we're talking about the resolution, are we saying that, I guess in the negative world, does that mean that there's no fossil fuels, or just that among all of these other fossil fuels, there's nuclear and there's all the renewables, and your stance is we need to be keeping nuclear above the renewables?
So, like, I think the question goes many ways in terms of the way you're asking it, but like, I'll try to narrow it down. What I would say is that, like, the resolution is a truth or falsity, right? Like, nations should do something means that I have to prove that nations shouldn't do that thing, not that they should do one thing over the other. In regards to the second, like, part of the question, I guess, is that like it's hard to say that like zero emissions are going to be achieved in any world, because like I'm not going to say it's a pipe dream, but like in terms of logical discussion, like I'd say that that's probably a pretty far reality in terms of how our society is moving. What I would say is we should absolutely optimize the way we go about the situation in terms of achieving as low emissions as possible. And the way the MIT study conducts that is that it finds that the best way to achieve that like achievable goal, I guess. I get that it's a double positive, but like it's using renewable energy and nuclear energy rather than prioritizing renewable energy, which France chose, that like, it's not really feasible. But can I take a question?
Absolutely.
So regarding this argument on like long-term investment and efficiency, you say we've made progress on renewables. Can you name a single developed country that runs primarily on wind or solar alone?
So I reject the premise of your question. And the reason why I reject the premise of your question is the vast majority of nations run on fossil fuels right now and are shifting toward renewables and shifting away from nuclear.
I'm not so sure that's true though. But I mean, I think that's cross. So you can take it away.
All right, everybody ready? All right, let's get started. Again, thank you to the judges and for Ken for participating in this debate. There's just a few things that I really want to talk about here. First, I'll address the points that he made, and then I'll come back and hit home some final voting issues for you. The main thing, when he talks about that nuclear is the most scalable, his one example was of France, and there's a reason why France has put all of their nuclear power plants along the border of Belgium and then of Italy as well. There's a reason they want to get it as far away from the population centers as possible, and that is the danger aspect, number one. Number two, even though nuclear runs 24/7, there's a much higher risk of environmental disasters compared to any of the renewables that I brought up. Now, any individual one of those renewable resources could be considered to be intermittent, but underneath the surface of the earth is always hot. There's geothermal. The largest rivers are always running. You have the ability to generate electricity at least somewhere and transmit using the power grid at all times. There's a reason why I don't have a nuclear reactor right outside my home to power the lights in my computer. We can transmit energy from where it's being produced to where it is needed. So back over to my case, I want to highlight the importance that investments have already been made, and it makes absolutely no sense to take all the progress that we've made, making things 3 times more efficient already in the last decade, and then saying, nope, let's scrap that and let's go with a form of energy that we scrapped in most developed countries or turned off decades ago. We've made that investment. Let's not throw away the 5,000 piece puzzle to make a 50,000 piece puzzle from scratch. Point number 2, safety, safety, safety. You're not going to have a Fukushima or 3 Mile Island natural disaster with this. And then finally, it's available everywhere, and we can transmit it to where it needs to be. For all those reasons, I urge an affirmative ballot, and I thank each and every one of you for participating in this round. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for that awesome speech. If anyone is not ready, I will begin my time in 3, 2, 1. Let's take down AF point by point. First, this long-term efficiency argument is wishful thinking at best. Yes, we've made strides in renewables, and yes, investment is rising, but hope is not a grid strategy. Wind and solar still only make up 11% of global energy, and without nuclear as a baseload, countries that try to go full renewable end up turning back to coal or gas. Germany tried it. Emissions went up immediately after they shut down nuclear. So no, this isn't progress, and don't let the AF paint it as such. The second argument, safety, safety, safety. The AF wants you to scare you with the word nuclear, but the World Health Organization themselves released in a press statement that nuclear energy has the lowest death rate per terawatt hour of any energy source, even lower than wind or solar. Even if you buy this ad hominem attack from the AF that France is, pushing all these bases outward towards their borders. One of the countries they border is Luxembourg, and Luxembourg is one of the cleanest countries in the Western world. Modern reactors are not Chernobyl or Fukushima. Gen 4 reactors are passively safe. They shut down automatically without human input, and solar panels and wind turbines can't say the same when natural disasters strike. Third, availability. They argue renewables are more available, but what they really mean is they're more abundant. That doesn't mean they're reliable. Don't take them at face here. The sun doesn't shine at night, the wind doesn't blow on command, and large-scale battery storage is still inaccessible, expensive, and inefficient. Even if you buy everything the AF says, that renewables are safer, growing, and improving, they never prove that prioritizing them over nuclear, which is what I said in the analysis, makes energy cleaner, more stable, or more sustainable. Even if renewables are the future, we need nuclear as the present to bridge the gap. Even if investment in renewables continues, abandoning nuclear limits options, increases emissions, and destabilizes grid. Even if the AF wins the safety argument, the biggest threat to global safety is climate change and energy poverty, both of which nuclear helps solve right now. So even on the AF's best day, neg still wins. The path forward is both, but if you're forced to prioritize the one that works in the dark, not the one that works when the weather is right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. And with all the judges' permission, of course, I'm triple entered, so I have to leave.
Best of luck.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Gonna get a thumbs up from the other judges, and we're good to start the next debate. Okay, starting the next debate. We've got Thomas on AF versus Archer on neg. 3 topics, putting them in the chat. For the audience, standardized testing should be abolished in education. The use of animals in scientific research is justified. Robots should have the same rights as humans if they achieve sentience. Negation, please.
Yeah, I'd like to strike topic 2, animals.
Cool. I'd like to strike topic 3.
We are debating topic number 1. Standardized testing should be abolished in education. Prep time starts now. Thirty seconds. That's time. Affirmative, whenever you're ready.
Cool. Thank you. I think firstly, it's a pretty easy appeal for most people hate doing their standardized tests. SATs, or in the UK, GCSEs and A levels are fearful and deeply unenjoyable. But I think it's important to focus on learning. That's what education is all about. And I'd argue 3 things that standardized testing fails students and fails schools in general. Firstly, it prevents learning. It causes teaching to the test. We see this time and time again. When you have a standardized test, schools get held to, suddenly teachers are not teaching to learn, they're teaching to get you for exams. I was a maths teacher, and I remember the 2 weeks before exams, you didn't focus on learning, you focused on drilling stuff into people's minds so they get a better grade. The second thing is mental health of students. Standardized testing is such a cause of stress and pain and worry for students because so much rides on these final end of year assessments. By using standardized tests, we prevent more holistic approaches to learning, like, for example, coursework or ongoing assessments from teachers. We don't trust teachers to give better assessments for students. This is really tough on people because it means that suddenly this one moment defines your life. And thirdly, it causes inequality, and that's my final argument. Standardized tests always bias towards topics of people in power and people in control. This means that more disadvantaged backgrounds gets missed out. Standardized testing focuses on the literature and learning of particular wealthy people and particular groups. We need to focus on learning that values people where they're at and what matters, instead of having to focus on one specific test. I expect the counter may start saying things about accountability, but universities have different exams and they're held accountable for their results. You have ongoing inspection, you have more supportive checking in on schools. We shouldn't just count on some exam at the end of the year to make sure that kids are actually learning, especially as those exams don't hold people to account, because they might just have kids from richer backgrounds. They might have more privileged kids. So that doesn't even tell us if the school is providing better outcomes. Some schools that I've seen that have better teaching have worse results because their children have more challenges and disadvantages. So standardized testing should be abolished.
Thank you very much. Negation.
Yes, give me 1 second to get my timer up. All right. And can I get a thumbs up that all judges are ready? Yes. Okay. To negate the resolution, standardized testing should be abolished in education. I'd like to start with an observation on the framework. Firstly, the use of the word abolish means that my opponent not only has to defend that standardized testing has its flaws, but that those flaws negate a complete abolishment or elimination of it, as opposed to other strategies such as deprioritizing or implementing different forms of standardized testing. I argue that he does not meet this burden and that standardized testing should be retained in specific circumstances with the criterions and contentions below. First of all, standardized testing is needed for objective measurement of some professional skills. We have to recommend that this is an education overall, not in one specific type of education, and as such should also be applied to things like trade schools, where standardized testing may be used to ensure that people meet the basic level of certification required to perform certain tasks safely. Without these standardized tests, it may not be clear that everyone is receiving the same level of evaluation, and therefore we're actually going against fairness. Number two, it helps teachers know where their students are and are not succeeding in order to progress. Standardized testing does not have to be purely about stress for students. In fact, an educational purpose can be for evaluation. Standardized tests don't have to be the make or break for life. Instead, I argue for a counterplan of deprioritizing them while still keeping them as standardized and objective measures to inform teachers' teaching strategy over time. Contention 3 is grade inflation. While grade inflation means that we cannot use other metrics that are truly objective because different schools have different ways that they're scoring. And in fact, a report by Business Insider in 2017 actually found that these problems were worse in white and wealthier schools, which means that on my opponent's point of equality, we have to improve equality by holding everyone to the same standard of a standardized test. Moving on to attack my opponent's case, in case 1, he talks about preventing learning because teachers are teaching to the test. I argue this does not mean full abolishment and instead means that we should simply reform curriculums to make standardized testing still a part, but perhaps not the only way of evaluating student success. Number 2, about mental health, again, can be solved by deprioritization. And number 3, about inequality, shows that standardized tests, while they may be biased towards certain groups, can still be reformed without being abolishment. And I bring you towards my point about grade inflation being actually higher in these white and wealthy schools to show that other metrics without standardization will lead to more unequal outcomes. For these reasons, I negate. Thank you.
Cross-X when you're ready.
Yeah, I'd be interested to just delve into that grade inflation case. So this was seen in sometimes in some pieces of coursework, that is true, but you can easily just balance that out, right? When you punish schools that overrate their students. I mean, universities, for example, the example you gave about like standardized testing, loads of them don't use standardized tests. They use different tests between universities, and we still have ways of ranking and understanding what university grades are valid or not, right? So I'm not sure that actually particularly holds, but I'd be interested by your thoughts.
Yeah, so my first thought is that the grade inflation point I was bringing up was largely not only that grade inflation exists, but that grade inflation right now exacerbates inequality. Additionally, I would argue that when universities have different tests, that actually doesn't provide a good measure to see what skills students know, because universities also have different curriculums. So a test from one university and another university are not always going to be comparable. And with my first point about certain professional skills where they need to demonstrate specific levels of proficiency, it's not reasonable to expect everyone that's evaluating these things to look side by side at every university's curriculum, syllabus, tests, etc. We need standardized measures. I actually have a question for you next, which is that why do you argue for fully abolishing standardized tests instead of taking other reforms for the education system, such as implementing more holistic evaluation in college admissions while still keeping tests as a component?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I think it's a false dichotomy that I'm not in favor of the more holistic testing. It just seems very much outdated when you look at the advances in technology that we can use to standardize education in schools. There's uses of AI right now where you can do more holistic assessments in schools as well. So it's not really clear to me that we need standardized tests to achieve any learning measurement. Also, to just add on to the point, it doesn't actually provide any feedback to teachers. You get a grade. In education, you have a difference between performance tracking and formative assessments. These standardized assessments don't give you feedback. They can't give you feedback because they're so large and at scale. Performance assessments, which teachers do all the time, are the ones that help grow students, and they already exist, and they have no weight on it, so students do them.
All right. I believe that's Crossx time.
Affirmation, please.
Cool, that sounds great. So I think it's best to go back to the point. What world is better for students? No standardized testing or the current system of what we've got, which is heavy amounts of standardized testing? You could argue that you may want to reform the system slightly, or maybe it should be occasionally a component for very specific cases. And I think that may be the case in trade schools. I'm willing to defer on that. But the focus is primarily schools, and by that I mean children. We don't need those for professional assessments. I'm talking about day-to-day life of a student in a primary school, secondary school, or even like higher years. They don't need those standardized assessments because we don't need specific safety checks, right? So I don't think the point there stands. I want to go back to also the fact that abolishment causes and challenges us to really shake up the system. Reforming the system slightly wouldn't actually change things for you and for students. We need to focus on abolishment to make us reform our entire educational model to serve students better. On the inequality front, I think it's really important to note that countries that have abolished educational assessments or standardized assessments have often found that it has improved wider education for students, because instead of focusing on forcing kids who are struggling up to meet a grade, they can focus on meeting them where they're at and helping them improve in skills that matter. We need to focus on skills, not passing a test. And ultimately, if we don't use standardized testing, we'll fail to support those students. So I think it's really important for the inequality points, but also for the fact that our education system has so many flaws and fails to empower teachers to teach students where they're at, that we need to just blanket abolish. I think in doing so, it will challenge us to rethink how we actually teach our kids. And if we do some sort of half-hearted measure, we won't be able to really rethink, we'll just slightly improve. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, all judges ready? Yes. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to begin by attacking my opponent's case before moving forward to defend my own. Firstly, on terms of the fact that people hate standardized tests, we're going to take this out completely. Second of all, in terms of the prevention of learning and mental health, my opponent says that we simply need to abolish because overall we have to consider our current system or nothing. However, I believe that the word abolish in this resolution means my opponent has to defend the complete elimination of standardized tests, not only in primary schools, but in education and all different applications in which they are. When he talks about preventing learning and mental health, he disregards the educational assessment objectives that these standardized testing can have, as well as for things like not only professional and trade schools, which he does concede on, but also things like developmental benchmarks to see which children need to be in specialized education. Oftentimes we need standardized tests that is based on widespread scientific consensus to see what students to actually flag. So in this ways, it can actually be used to improve mental health. Lastly, on his point about inequality, he talks about better educational outcomes happening in places where standardized testing is abolished. This is correlation, not causation, and fails to occur for the multitude of factors such as teacher pay and educational system overall, which also impacts this. He also talks about teaching to the skills and not the test, but he does not necessarily show a difference between those with abolished standardized testing and those which simply keep it in lower capacities, such as for student evaluation. Moving on to defend my own argument, I first talked about the need for professional skills. My opponent conceded here. I would also like to talk about help teachers progressing. When my opponent says that this is not feedback, I argue that we need standardized testing, not just for feedback to individual students, which I believe was what my opponent misinterpreted, but as feedback for the teachers to know how they are teaching overall. If there is no good way for a teacher in one school to compare their students' performance to teachers in other schools, they don't actually know how well they are performing those students for the real world environment. Lastly, my third contention of grade inflation, my opponent largely completely dropped, especially the evidence where I said that grade inflation was actually highest in white and wealthy schools, as Business Insider showed in 2017. This would also apply to other holistic things such as extracurriculars, where students who are not working are going to have more time to do these things. So if we don't have standardized testing, we're looking at measures which are also biased, also going to lead to mental health struggles and prevent learning. We need standardized testing for some limited purpose, and that is objectivity. Thank you.
Thank you both. Whenever my colleagues are ready. Good. Good. Awesome. Last but not least, we've got Rick on the affirmative versus Prithvi on the negative. Topics going into the chat. For the audience, the benefits of remote work outweigh the drawbacks. Cultural appropriation is a significant problem in the modern world. The Olympic Games should include esports as an official category. Negative? Which one do you want to strike?
Sorry, muted. I'll check on one, please.
We're getting rid of remote work. Affirmative?
Let's cut esports.
Okay, we are debating cultural appropriation is a significant problem in the modern world. 2 minutes prep starts now. One minute. Okay, affirmative whenever you're ready.
Great. Cultural appropriation is a significant problem in the modern world. I'm going to talk about 3 points. First, about stereotyping and marginalization. Second, about empowering cultural creators within their own communities. And third, preserving cultural legacy and knowledge of communities that would otherwise be marginalized. The first point I want to talk about is stereotypes and marginalization. The idea here is pretty simple. It says, like, when we have cultural appropriation, right, which is where the dominant culture, so like white folks, take a particular culture and then use its culture for its own gain. So, for example, like the Kansas City Chiefs, taking Native American leadership and saying like, oh, you are just a mascot of a football team. That's a problem because it says that people that like these marginalized cultures exist or non-dominant cultures exist, but that they don't matter as much as serving the interests of the dominant culture that is like taking, marginalizing, and appropriating those people. We know that like that marginalized groups in America and all over the world like are at very significant disparities, whether it's health or income or education, and all of those go back to the idea that it's like it's okay to violate those people like for the dominant culture. It's not. That is the underlying reasoning behind why all of those bad things happen. So it is a significant problem if we accept that we want to make it so that everyone is lifted up to the same level. We can never get that unless we prevent or say that like cultural appropriation is problematic. The second argument I want to make here is about funding for individual creators in these marginalized communities. When we have cultural appropriation, we're making it so that like entertainment and like cultural items, right? Like if you look at like especially like Western movies, for example, a lot of time Native peoples are not portrayed by Native actors, and instead it's like, oh yeah, it's okay that we deny them, when instead we should be allowing like Native voices to be heard in cultural like in culture more broadly in order to hear them. We get more interesting stuff that way, like Res Dogs, the FX series. If you haven't watched it, check it out because it's an awesome argument. Okay, cool.
Negative, whenever you're ready.
Sorry, I was switching between the Chrome tabs and Google. It's all gets in the way. Okay, can I get a thumbs up from judges, please? Awesome. Okay, my time will begin on my first word. Okay, so today, thank you, first of all, judges and my opponent for giving me this debate. We are arguing the negation of cultural appropriation is a significant problem in the modern world. So first, I'm going to argue that creating cultural appropriation as a significant problem, significant defined by Oxford as sufficiently great or important to be worthy of attention, putting the attention on cultural appropriation, it denigrates into social outcasting eventually. It also takes away attention from more important issues. And my opponent's case is largely on cultural imbalances within a society. The focus should be on balancing those cultural issues rather than just focusing on cultural appropriation and why it shouldn't happen. So first, talking about denigrating social outcasting, it essentially makes people not allowed to integrate into society. There's a very good example with the Ghost of Tsushima release where they had a white man play a Japanese instrument for the trailer music. And people were complaining about that because it was a piece of Japanese culture. However, that white man was one of the only people recognized by the Japanese community as a grandmaster in that instrument. When we focus on cultural appropriation to this degree, it becomes a social outcast where people cannot fully integrate into this culture, and it blurs the line between cultural appropriation and cultural acceptance, being able to lift cultural practices up. Second, takes away attention from more important issues. There are plenty of other issues that we should be putting the attention on rather than people trying to appreciate a culture. Cultural appropriation can happen and it can be negative, but by making it a significant problem noteworthy of attention, it draws away attention from problems that have real impact on people, like defunding and like the racial imbalances that my opponent brings up. So talking about Native voices in media and how they should be represented, this would be great. The only issue is that Native voices right now are marginalized and underrepresented in most media. What we should be doing is putting attention on how we can actually lift natives up rather than just keeping their culture to themselves, how we can make them represented properly so that they do have more opportunities rather than just playing native characters. We see white characters typecast as POC all the time, and that's fine because POC need representation. What we should be doing is focusing attention on being able to, oh, sorry, that's my time, but Judge, I implore you to vote for the negation.
Cross-X, whenever y'all are ready.
Got it. Rick, do you want to start with the first question?
Sure. When you're saying that cultural appropriation makes it so that we ignore all other problems, like the resolution's only talking about how it is a problem or a significant problem, not the only specific problem, right? Like you don't get to win the debate because like global warming is a problem in addition to cultural appropriation, right? Like, can we agree to that?
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that making it that the prompt specifies that this is the most important issue. I'm saying even by calling it significant, we're already taking away attention because there's only a limited amount of attention. Don't have infinite attention.
So anytime we say anything is a problem, it means that we are like unable to like walk and chew gum at the same time.
Not what I'm saying. Again, unable is not the same thing as difficult to. You can't balance both problems at an equal rate because your attention is going to be focused on something else. Significant problems require action and attention because of that action. And so to make cultural appropriation a significant problem or to make it more significant than it really is, it does end up taking away action and importance from other problems that can be solved.
Okay, I guess I still just don't understand why that's the case, but I'll let you ask the next one.
Okay, sure. I did want to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs problem that you brought up because I think that's important. Kansas City Chiefs shouldn't have happened. I'm just curious, would it have been just as derogatory had the Native Americans not been marginalized, had they been an equal group? I'm just trying to determine whether the deciding factor here is the fact that they were
marginalized, so it's irrelevant. That's what I would say to your question, right? You're like, this is trying to say that like, well, yeah, if we had a totally equal society, it wouldn't be a problem. But that's exactly what the first point in my case is critiquing, that this is the ultimate logic behind it, which is saying that like, oh yeah, you're just not worthy of consideration because we can just appropriate you and it's not an issue.
I'm sorry.
Like, the casual indifference there is the problem.
It's not
that I'm actually trying to point out.
I'm trying to ask you,
that's the underlying reasoning.
I'm trying to ask you at the heart of the issue, whether we're focusing on giving attention to marginalized communities specifically, or just stopping other communities from taking culture in general. Oh, that's time for Crossfire.
Yep. Okay, are ready for the, all right. Start on the neg case. The first is about like this denigration because there was a white guy who played a Japanese instrument in a video game. If you're trying to tell me that Japanese culture is important and that there are Japanese people that could have done that, like that's like one like pretty minor example. And there are going to be other ones that I'm going to get to as I like go through more. But like we should have a Japanese person playing that if it is available. Like I don't see why that's like particularly controversial. That itself may not be a significant problem, but there are more important ones I'll get to on my side of the case. The second one is that there are more important things that we could be focusing on. This is saying that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time, because any time that we spent on preventing cultural appropriation, that makes it so that we can't do other things. We need to be doing both in order to strive for equality. And the first argument I made in my case undercuts this. This is the underlying logic that because it's okay to do cultural appropriation, it means that we get to treat people differently. And acting like that's okay is what leads to all of those disparities that I talked about in my case. So if we're talking about solving the larger underlying problems, that first point in my case like matters more. So when he's saying that like Native voices are marginalized and like, well, white people portray people of color all the time, the idea that that's okay is the problem, because it says that it is all right for the dominant culture to subvert like non-dominant cultures, and that they are different, and that it is okay to ignore them. And that was exactly the point in my case. So just saying like, oh, it doesn't seem to be like a big problem. It ignores the health disparities, the education disparities, the economic disparities that exist. And that's why, and cultural appropriation does that because it says it's okay for the dominant culture in order to treat people this way. And it's not. So it is a significant problem because it spills over into so many other places, and we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Lastly, when we have cultural appropriation, we're making it so that we don't get the preservation and expansion of those minority cultures that exist, right? We're denying them funding because we're saying, oh, like media that replaces culture is okay. We can just have white people do it and it's not a problem. That means we're losing out on really great voices like Native American voices in media, Japanese people who do know how to play those instruments. Because I don't believe you if you tell me that only that one white person was able to do that. That marginalization is wrong.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't realize my mic was unmuted. The keyboard quacking must have been so annoying. I apologize for that. Is everyone ready
we
for
actually
the?
couldn't hear it. It's all good. But ready
Okay, perfect. Is everyone ready for the next constructive? Sorry, that thumbs up for everyone. I couldn't tell. Got it. Sorry. Okay. My time. Oh, sorry. To my timer. Actually, I guess you can stop me, right? Last one. Okay. My time will begin on my first word then. So first of all, thank you again to my judges and opponent for giving this debate. We're gonna go over both cases. First, to reiterate my point, because my opponent talks about we can just have white people do it and it's not a problem. We can have white people portray Native voices. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if Native voices were given the opportunity to play in any role and not just be typecast to Native roles, this would not be an issue. It's the oppression that matters, not just the fact that we are different cultures. The oppression is what we should be solving. And my opponent argues that I'm saying we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. That's not what I'm saying. My point is that action is a limited resource. People can only do so many things at a time. And so to make it a significant problem of just cultural appropriation, rather than making the significant issue cultural imbalances, we can actually focus action on fixing those imbalances rather than just making it an issue of the fact that each culture should stay to their own practice. My opponent doesn't believe that the one white guy was the only person who could have played that instrument. I think there was maybe 6 people. It was a very small number of people that could have done it. And I mean, people were limited at certain times. The game was coming out. The release date was upcoming. There are only a certain amount of people that can do it. And again, my opponent shows this point very by himself to denigrate that one white guy as someone who couldn't have done it, even though he was perfectly enthralled in the philosophical practice and the cultural practice of that instrument. It outcasts him from that culture that he's been so deeply integrated in. So, Judge, if we are to vote for the affirmative, we are going to end up socially outcasting people that are trying to genuinely integrate into this culture, trying to appreciate these practices. And yes, the Kansas City Chiefs is a terrible example. It is a bad thing that should have happened, but it's bad because Native Americans were marginalized and oppressed, not just because they are separate groups from the majority of the American diaspora. So, Judge, to say that cultural appropriation is a significant problem in the modern world, cultural imbalances are a significant problem in the modern world, and focusing on cultural appropriation is only going to lead to more outcasting. So with that, Judge, I implore you to vote for the negation.
Congratulations to all debaters. Great job on finals. Thank you so much to my fellow judges, and thank you to Blake and the ProSTA for setting this up.